In the hushed hours before dawn, a black nurse with a voice like Sunday morning gospel sat beside a fading patient and sang softly, cradling his hand as machines hummed their final rhythms. Her song wasn't on any chart, and her care didn't clock out. It was instinct, shaped by grief, faith, and years of quiet service. What she didn't know was that the hospital CEO, weary from a sleepless night and wandering the halls unseen, had paused outside the room, listening. In that moment, policy met humanity, and everything sterile about the building cracked open just a little. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe quiet genius always finds a way, hit that like button and subscribe for more. For Nurse Althea Washington, this pre-dawn ritual was as much a part of her rounds as checking vitals or administering medication, though it appeared on no official checklist. She worked the graveyard shift in the palliative care wing of City General, a place where the air often felt heavy with unspoken sorrows and the fluorescent lights did little to dispel the encroaching shadows. Her colleagues, a rotating cast of dedicated but often overwhelmed professionals, knew Althea as a pillar of quiet strength, a woman whose calm demeanor could soothe the most agitated patient or comfort the most distraught family member. They saw her dedication, her tireless work ethic, but few understood the deep well of personal history that fueled her profound empathy. Althea had buried her own mother young, had sung her to sleep in those final, painful days, and the echoes of that loss resonated in every gentle touch, every soft-spoken word. She wasn't just doing a job, she was tending to souls, her own included. This profound, almost spiritual commitment was her hidden strength, often overlooked in a system that prized efficiency and measurable outcomes above all else. But what happened next would change everything. Althea Washington had come to nursing late, after a youth spent caring for ailing family members had steered her away from her initial dream of teaching music. The transition felt natural, a different kind of classroom where the lessons were about dignity, comfort, and the unyielding power of human connection in the face of mortality. Her voice, rich and resonant, had once filled church halls. Now, it was a balm in sterile rooms, a private concert for an audience of one. She carried within her the memory of her grandmother, a woman whose hands were never idle, always tending, mending, or offering a warm meal, a woman who believed that true service was an act of quiet love. Althea lived by that creed. She understood the language of pain, the subtle cues of fear, the silent plea for presence. She'd seen countless sunrises from hospital windows, each one a reminder of the preciousness of time and the weight of her calling. Her closest confidant on the floor was a younger nurse named Maria, barely 5 years into her career but already wise to the emotional toll of their work. Maria often sought Althea out during their shared breaks, not for advice on procedures, but for the unspoken understanding that flowed between them. "How do you do it, Althea?" Maria had asked one particularly difficult night, after they had lost a patient both had grown fond of. Althea had simply patted her hand, her eyes gentle. "We carry them with us, child," she'd said softly. "And we remember why we're here." The opposing force in Althea's world wasn't a single person, but something far more pervasive, the creeping institutionalization of care, the endless stream of protocols and paperwork that often felt designed to quantify the unquantifiable. It was the pressure to discharge patients quickly, the focus on metrics over moments, the subtle discouragement of anything that couldn't be billed or charted. This system was personified, in a way, by the hospital's chief executive officer, Mr. James Harrison. Althea had only seen him a handful of times, usually striding purposefully down a corridor, his expression unreadable, surrounded by an entourage. He was a figurehead, a name on memos discussing budget cuts and efficiency drives. A rumor circulated that he had once been a surgeon, but now he dealt in spreadsheets and board meetings, his world seemingly far removed from the hushed rooms where life ebbed and flowed. The hospital itself, City General, was a sprawling complex of brick and glass, a testament to modern medicine. Its corridors were long, polished to a high shine, reflecting the sterile, blue-white light. Equipment hummed and beeped, a constant technological heartbeat. Yet, within this edifice of scientific achievement, Althea cultivated small oases of humanity. She'd bring in lavender sachets for patients agitated by chemical smells, adjust pillows with an artist's care, and always, she listened. She knew that sometimes, the greatest comfort came not from a pill, but from a shared silence, a hand held, a song sung not for performance, but for peace. She held a quiet conviction that her true work lay in these unscripted acts, a potential the system failed to recognize, let alone reward. That particular morning, The patient was Mr. Henderson, an elderly gentleman with no family left, his life fading like an old photograph. Althea had been with him for several shifts. She knew he'd been a jazz musician in his youth, his stories fragmented but full of a life richly lived. As the monitors traced their declining lines, she took his thin, papery hand. The room was still, save for the rhythmic sigh of the ventilator. And then, Althea began to sing. It was an old spiritual, one her grandmother used to hum while baking, a song of passage, of peace, of going home. Her voice, usually kept to a gentle murmur, swelled slightly, imbued with a profound tenderness. Outside, in the corridor, James Harrison stopped. He hadn't intended to be in this wing. Exhaustion from a grueling week of budget negotiations had driven him from his office, a restless energy propelling him through the silent hospital. He often walked the halls at night, a habit from his surgical residency, a way to reconnect, however fleetingly, with the core mission he sometimes felt was slipping through his fingers amidst the endless administrative battles. He'd been about to turn back when the sound reached him, faint at first, then clearer. A woman's voice, singing. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but more than that, it was intimate, sacred. He found himself standing motionless outside room 312, a room he knew, from the quiet sorrow that emanated even through the closed door, was a place of imminent loss. Policy dictated quiet, efficiency, minimal emotional engagement that could lead to burnout. What he was hearing was the antithesis of that. It was raw, unfiltered humanity. The song continued, a melody weaving through the sterile air, a thread of warmth in the clinical cold. Harrison, a man of numbers and strategy, felt an unfamiliar stirring, a dissonance between the hospital he managed and the act of profound compassion he was witnessing. His mind, conditioned to analyze and optimize, struggled to categorize this. It wasn't on any care plan. It wouldn't appear on any performance review. Yet, it felt more vital, more essential, than anything he'd discussed in the boardroom that week. He knew, with a sudden, disquieting certainty, that this moment, this unquantifiable act of grace, was something he was supposed to discourage, or at least, not officially condone. The unspoken rules, the culture of detached professionalism, would deem it unconventional, perhaps even inefficient. He leaned his head against the cool wall, the sound washing over him, and felt a weariness deeper than just lack of sleep. Althea finished her song, her voice fading into the hum of the machines. She sat for a moment longer, holding Mr. Henderson's hand, then gently laid it by his side. She adjusted his blanket, her movements economical and kind. She was unaware of the silent witness in the hallway, her focus solely on the man before her, on the dignity of his passing. As she stepped out of the room a few minutes later, her face composed but tinged with the quiet sorrow that always accompanied these goodbyes, the corridor was empty. Mr. Harrison had retreated, not wanting to be seen. The melody and the moment seared into his mind. The next day, Harrison found himself distracted during a high-level meeting about patient satisfaction scores. The numbers were adequate, even good in some areas, but they felt hollow. He kept thinking about the song, about the profound sense of peace it had conveyed. He asked his assistant to pull the staffing roster for the palliative care wing, night shift. Althea Washington. The name meant nothing to him beyond a line on a spreadsheet. He began to walk the palliative wing more often during his late-night wanderings, not directly seeking her out, but observing. He saw other nurses, diligent and professional. He saw the efficiency he championed, but he didn't hear another song. He started to look at patient feedback forms differently, searching not just for complaints or commendations about medical treatment, but for mentions of kindness, of connection. He found a few, often buried in general praise, small anecdotes of nurses who went the extra mile. He also found himself reviewing policies on non-medical patient support, on bereavement protocols. They were clinically sound, legally robust, but emotionally sterile. He thought of Althea's song, an act that transcended any written policy. A few weeks later, a minor incident occurred. Althea had stayed past her shift to comfort a distressed family who had just lost their mother. She hadn't logged the overtime correctly, focused more on the grieving daughter than the time clock. A unit manager, strictly adhering to protocol, issued a formal written warning for the administrative lapse. It was a small thing, standard procedure, but when it crossed Harrison's desk as part of a routine report, it resonated with his earlier experience. Here was the system, in its impersonal efficiency, penalizing an act of profound compassion. He felt a prickle of frustration, a sense of being trapped within the very structures he was meant to uphold. He imagined Althea, with her gentle voice and quiet dignity, receiving that warning. It felt wrong. He summoned the unit manager. "Tell me about Nurse Washington," he asked, keeping his tone neutral. The manager, flustered by the unexpected summons, described Althea as a reliable, experienced nurse, albeit a little old-fashioned, and sometimes too involved with patients. "She's good at her job, Mr. Harrison, but rules are rules." Harrison listened, his expression unreadable. "Indeed," he said softly. "Rules are rules. But are they always right?" The question hung in the air. He didn't countermand the warning. That would undermine the managerial chain. But the conversation solidified a growing unease within him. The system he presided over was, in small but significant ways, stifling the very humanity it should have been nurturing. He began to subtly question long-standing practices and meetings, not with accusations, but with inquiries. "Are we measuring what truly matters?" he'd ask. "Could our efficiency drives be having unintended consequences on staff morale or patient experience in ways our current metrics don't capture?" Some of his executive team looked at him with surprise. This was a new tone for Harrison, who was usually focused on the bottom line, on clinical outcomes, on competitive positioning. He encountered polite but firm resistance. "We have best practice protocols, James," one senior director reminded him. "They're evidence-based." Harrison knew he couldn't dismantle the entire edifice of modern hospital administration overnight. But the image of Althea singing to Mr. Henderson, the purity of that moment, had become a lodestar. He tasked a small, trusted team with a discrete project to explore initiatives that could rehumanize the patient experience, focusing less on amenities and more on genuine human connection and emotional support, particularly in end-of-life care. He didn't mention Althea. He didn't need to. Her example was the silent premise of his new directive. He felt a strange mixture of trepidation and resolve. He was a CEO, a man of power and influence, yet he felt like he was learning the most fundamental lessons about his organization from one of its quietest, most unassuming employees. His internal struggle intensified. He reviewed Althea's personnel file. Years of steady, unremarkable service, a few commendations for diligence, no major disciplinary actions until the recent warning. Nothing in the official record captured the essence of what he'd witnessed. It was as if her greatest strength was invisible to the system. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just to the hospital's financial health, but to its soul. He knew he was approaching a point where he would have to take a more public stand to challenge the status quo more directly. The memory of Althea's song, a quiet act of defiance against the sterility he now saw everywhere, became his quiet determination. He felt discouraged sometimes by the inertia of the bureaucracy, the deeply ingrained habits of thought. But then he'd recall that melody and the quiet strength in Althea's voice, and his resolve would harden. He was moving towards something, a confrontation not with a person, but with a mindset. The opportunity, or rather the necessity, for a more decisive move arrived unexpectedly. A local newspaper published a rather critical piece on the impersonal nature of care at large city hospitals, citing anonymous sources who spoke of feeling like numbers, not people, particularly in palliative situations. While City General wasn't singled out harshly, the article struck a chord with public sentiment and put pressure on all local healthcare institutions. The board called an emergency meeting. This was Harrison's moment. He knew what the board would expect: a defense of their current practices, a plan to improve PR, perhaps a token initiative. Instead, Harrison decided to speak from the heart, a risk in such a results-driven environment. He prepared his notes, but the core of his message wasn't in statistics, it was in the memory of a song in a darkened room. He felt a knot of anxiety, but also a strange sense of clarity. He was about to advocate for something that couldn't easily be measured on a balance sheet but was, he now believed, the most valuable asset they possessed. The boardroom was intimidating, all polished mahogany and expectant faces. The chairman, a stern man named Arthur Davies, known for his fiscal conservatism, opened the floor to Harrison. The air was thick with tension, the city's skyline a distant, indifferent backdrop through the panoramic windows. Harrison began, not with a rebuttal of the newspaper article, but with a story. He didn't name Althea, nor the specific patient. He spoke of wandering the halls late one night, of hearing a sound that stopped him in his tracks. He described the song, the atmosphere of profound peace and dignity in a room where life was ending. He spoke of care that transcended charts and protocols. "What I witnessed," Harrison said, his voice steady, "wasn't something we trained for in seminars. It wasn't something we can quantify in our current patient satisfaction surveys. But it was, I believe, the absolute pinnacle of care. It was humanity, pure and simple, offered at a moment of profound vulnerability. He paused, letting his words sink in. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Others looked intrigued. Davy's expression remained stony. Our policies, Harrison continued, our relentless drive for efficiency, for standardization, are we, in our pursuit of excellence, inadvertently creating an environment where such acts of profound, unscripted compassion are the exception rather than the norm? Are we valuing the chart more than the touch, the protocol more than the presence? He saw a flicker of something, understanding, annoyance, in a few eyes. He then laid out his proposal, not just a new program, but a shift in philosophy. Increased staffing in palliative care to allow for more time with each patient. Training that emphasized empathetic communication and emotional support alongside clinical skills. A review of protocols to ensure they didn't unintentionally penalize staff for spending too much unbillable time with patients or their families. He proposed a quiet hero initiative to recognize and celebrate staff members who demonstrated exceptional compassion, not based on grand gestures, but on consistent, everyday acts of kindness. The pushback was immediate. James, this is admirable, but how do we measure the ROI on humanity? One director asked, his tone skeptical. Our primary responsibility is to fiscal health and clinical outcomes, another chimed in. Arthur Davies finally spoke, his voice gravelly. Harrison, are you suggesting we abandon proven methodologies for sentimentality? Harrison stood firm. I'm suggesting, Arthur, that sentimentality, or what I would call human dignity and compassion, is not mutually exclusive with excellent clinical outcomes or fiscal responsibility. In fact, I believe they are intrinsically linked. A patient who feels genuinely cared for, whose fear is acknowledged, whose spirit is tended to, may not live longer, especially in palliative care, but their quality of life, and their family's experience of that loss, will be immeasurably better. And that, gentlemen, ladies, is also a measure of our success. He spoke with a conviction that surprised even himself. He felt the weight of all those sterile corridors, all those unacknowledged moments of quiet heroism, resting on his shoulders. His internal fear was still there, but the clarity of his purpose was stronger. He was fighting for the soul of his hospital. The debate was lengthy, at times heated, but Harrison's quiet passion, his uncharacteristic vulnerability, and the undeniable truth of his observations began to chip away at the resistance. He didn't win every point. But by the end of the meeting, there was a grudging consensus to pilot some of his initiatives, to explore this softer side of care more formally. The system hadn't been overthrown, but a significant crack had appeared in its armor. Harrison felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a quiet triumph. He had spoken his truth, and it had been heard. The institution, for so long rigid and unyielding, had bent, just a little. In the weeks that followed, a subtle shift began. A memo went out, not about budget cuts, but about the importance of presence and patient care. The Quiet Hero initiative was launched, with nominations invited from patients, families, and staff. Althea Washington, still working her night shifts, still singing her soft songs to those on the edge of forever, noticed a slightly different atmosphere. Nurses seemed a little less rushed. There was more talk in the break room about the emotional side of their work, less about just getting through the tasks. One evening, Mr. Harrison was walking the palliative wing again. He saw Althea emerge from her room, her expression one of quiet contemplation. This time, he didn't retreat. He approached her. "Nurse Washington," he said, his voice gentle. Althea looked up, surprised to see the CEO. "Mr. Harrison," she acknowledged, a slight questioning in her eyes. "I just wanted to say," Harrison began, then paused, searching for the right words. He didn't mention the song. He didn't need to. "The work you do here, it's invaluable. Truly invaluable." Althea's eyes, which had seen so much, held his gaze. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Thank you, sir. We just try to ease the journey." He simply nodded, a depth of unspoken understanding passing between them. He offered her a small card. "There's a new advisory group forming on enhancing compassionate care. I thought your perspective might be useful." Althea looked at the card, then back at him. "I'd be honored, Mr. Harrison." He nodded again and continued his walk, a sense of peace settling over him. The hospital was still a place of policy and procedure, but now there was a little more room for the human heart, a little more space for the songs. The sterile building felt, just a little, warmer. Althea watched him go, then slipped the card into her pocket, a quiet affirmation of a truth she had always known, that the greatest healing often came not from a machine, but from a connection, soul to soul. Her work, once a hidden current, was now, in some small way, acknowledged, its value woven, however subtly, into the fabric of the institution. The future was not guaranteed, but hope, like a softly sung melody, lingered in the air. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.